first session, we are going to talk about standards and why standards matter. So I'm going to give you a brief history of PDF, a couple of slides, and explain that PDF is not a single standard. PDF is a series of standards. And instead, we won't go into detail on every standard, but I'll focus on PDF-A, PDF-UA, PADES, and then PDF 2.0, and next generation PDF, what comes after PDF. But before I talk about PDF, let me something else. When I travel, I always bring this box. And in this box, well, depending on where I go, the content is different. If I'm in Europe, I need this. If I'm in the States, I need this. There are some other plugs that I need if I go to the UK, if I go to Japan. So for me, it's kind of annoying because I need a box, and sometimes I'm in a country and I don't have anything that fits. Now, from a vendor point of view, this is great. They can sell a lot of hardware. They can sell one for this country, one for another country, and then you have these bricks that are like for every country, but then when you plug them into the wall, they fall out, so that's annoying. I also bring this, and this is quite nice because before, when I went to the States, I bought me an American SIM card, an American phone to go online. When I went to another country, I had to pay a lot of money for roaming. This is a device I can give myself Wi-Fi in more than 60 countries, and I only need one device. From a vendor point of view, this is very disruptive because the people who made this, they made sure that all the other ones who had like the old situation, that they can be kind of pushed out of the market. Now we're here in a context of working for the government. And for a government, this situation is bad. They want a situation for the citizens where citizens have easy access, where things work well together. And that's where standards come into play. So this is a painting by a Flemish painter about the Tower of Babel. It's a biblical story, and it's a punishment. So the people of Babel were punished, and how were they punished? Well, suddenly everyone talked a different language, and they couldn't communicate anymore, and the tower never got completed. So my point is, not being able to understand each other is a punishment. It's not a business model. It's not a way to make more money. And standards are about speaking the same language. Now, if we look at the history of PDF, it's very hard to read, I know, but PDF, the initial ID dates from '91, where John Warnock, one of the founders of Adobe, he wrote something called the Camelot paper. And the problem he wanted to solve is, you have different operating systems, you have different types of software to create content, but when you print the content, when you present the content, you can have different results depending on the operating system, depending on the software you use. And he said it would be cool if we could create a document format that solves this problem. And that's the P of PDF, portable. When you have a document on Mac, when you have a document on Windows, on Unix, and you print it, it's very reliable. It will always look the same, no matter on which operating system, no matter which software you use. And you can see the first PDF specification dates from '93, and you see all the different versions up until PDF 2.0 from this year. And you can see that the specification, 230 pages, 302, it always went up, but here 1,310, it went down. Why did it? Did it become easier? No, because instead of putting everything in the one standard, we put stuff in different specifications, and you can see the whole evolution. And these are all the landmarks. And at some point, some of the PDF specifications became an ISO standard, but the core PDF standard became an ISO standard in 2008. PDF was originally copyrighted by Adobe, so Adobe was the owner of the specification. But in 2007, Adobe decided to donate the specification to AIM, which is an organization like semi-government, an organization of different companies and stakeholders. And the goal was that AIM would make the PDF standard an ISO standard. Let's see. So this is easier to read than this. So PDF became an ISO standard in 2008. It wasn't the first ISO standard because the graphic arts industry already made a subset of PDF a standard, PDFX, that's in 2001. Archiving is since 2005. Now, one of the problems that existed with archiving is that several governments said, well, it's great that there's an ISO standard, but the ISO standard is based on a proprietary specification. And so, because this proprietary specification, because this specification, the core specification is owned by Adobe, we don't want to adopt PDF-A. And that was one of the reasons why Adobe made the decision to make PDF as a specification ISO standard. You also have PDF-E for engineering, VT for printing, UA for accessibility, and you have a set of related specifications. And I marked the ones with red that I'm going to go into more detail. Now, PDF-A for archiving, it's long-term preservation. PDF-A is a standard that makes that your documents that you can consume today, that you can still consume them in 50 years, in 100 years. In the US, they say, as long as the Republic exists. A couple of years ago, we thought that would be very long. With Donald Trump, we don't know that anymore, but okay, it's the long term that is envisaged here. Now, the first standard dates from 2005, and the goal was that parts that are approved will never become invalid, but all the parts that follow, they will just add new functionality. And so, what is PDF-A about? What is the difference between the core PDF specification and PDF-A? Well, there are some obligations and there are some restrictions. Among the obligations, you have the obligation of presenting metadata in XMP, the Extensible Metadata Platform. What does this mean? Well, PDF had metadata, but software that didn't understand PDF could not retrieve the metadata. So XMP, that's an XML stream that is added to the PDF in clear text. And so if you have all the bytes of a PDF, you can have software that understands nothing about PDF, but it can find the XML, and so it can retrieve the metadata. XMP can also, for instance, be used in an image. So for instance, you have a JPEG, and maybe your software doesn't know what the JPEG is about. Maybe your software doesn't understand JPEG, but it can retrieve the XML to get the metadata about the image. Also, the document must be self-contained. For instance, especially when you have a non-Western font, you could say, I'm going to create the PDF, but I'm not going to include the fonts. The fonts will be retrieved from the operating system. Now, that could be a problem in, for instance, if you send the document to someone else who doesn't have the font, maybe he won't be able to read the file. And also, maybe you have the font today, but in 50 years, who knows who will have the font. So one of the obligations is all fonts have to be embedded. You can't have any external files. Like you could say, oh, to save some file size, I'm going to add a link to a movie, and then when people have the movie, either online or offline, they just click it and then it's loaded and we watch it. Well, sound, movie, other binary files, there are no external resources allowed. No JavaScript allowed. That's because, yeah, how will the JavaScript be interpreted? Will it always be interpreted the same way? Also with JavaScript, you could have, for instance, you could say, here goes today's date, and then you don't want a document like an invoice with a date that always changes depending on you could say, or you could say, if we open the invoice before that date, the invoice says $100, and after that date, it says $200. So no JavaScript to avoid problems like that. And no encryption allowed. That's because maybe the encryption or the decryption algorithm gets lost. PDFA is about making the content available, not about kind of protecting the content. You have to be sure that in 50 years, in 100 years, everyone can access the content. And so there are 3 versions. Currently, the ISO committee is working on a 4th version. The first version defined is based on PDF 1.4. So PDF 1.4 was a specification owned, copyright, proprietary to Adobe. And it defined a level B, basic, means that whenever you open it visually to the human eye, it will always be the same. You also have a level A, accessible. That means that you also have structure. It's a tag PDF. In the next, when I talk about PDFA, I'll go into more detail. And so that dated from 2005, and then in 2008 we had ISO 32000, so the core specification became an ISO standard, and PDF A2 was created so that the ISO standard for archiving is based on another ISO standard and not on the proprietary format owned by Adobe. And while we were at it, we added some features that were introduced in PDF 1.5, 1.6, 1.7. For instance, JPEG 2000, collections, optional content, better support for transparency. Digital signatures were not that well explained in PDF A1, so some better rules. Another level was also added, level U. That means that's level B, but all text is in Unicode. Now the trend is to kind of leave the idea of levels. Level U is not used that much. You will always see level A or B. And then PDF A3, 1 year later, it's based on PDF A2. It even has the same typos. There's only one difference. In PDF A2, everything needs to be archivable. Everything needs to be compliant with PDFA. So also the attachments. So if you attach a document to a PDF A2 document, and that document also needs to be a PDFA document. With PDF A3, the core document, the basic document, needs to be compliant with PDF A3, but the attachments do not need to be PDFA. For instance, you could say, I'm going to convert a Word document to a PDF. You can have the PDF as a PDF A3, but the original Word document as an attachment. Another example is you have some report, let's say, how is business doing in the world, and that report is based on some calculations in Excel. Well, you could have the report in PDF A3 and the attachment, the Excel file as extra documentation. Now, I didn't go into detail for PDF, for accessibility, level A. And accessibility, that's also defined in another standard, ISO 14289. It's about universal accessibility. And I'm not going to give you the technical specifications, but just look at this PDF. When I read this out loud, and I say worksheet 4, capacity interview, you interpret this is the title. And then I say step 1, explore and so on, step 2, step 3. You as humans say, well, this is a list, and we have like a label for the list, step 1, step 2, step 3, and we have content for every list item. So there's structure, title, list item, list item, list item, labels, content. Now, for a machine, it's not that simple. If you would parse this text, parse this content, and it was an ordinary document, a machine would not know that this is part of a list. A machine, when it sees this, for instance, it doesn't know. It could be a title, could be anything. It's just some characters on a page, and you need some intelligence. You need like an artificial intelligence. Adobe is currently working on a neural network. You can feed it a PDF without structure, and then the neural network uses artificial intelligence to add this kind of information. Now, this is difficult, so what do? We can create a PDF where we add that semantic information inside. And that's called tagged PDF. So when a PDF is properly tagged, a machine has all this information that we as humans know. Now you can say, well, this is not difficult. Why do you need tagged PDF? But you could have something like this. This has a lot of information. It's like when someone does an assessment for a job. So someone wants to get a job. And to get the position, you need this score. This is purple. And then you do the test, and this is your result. Now, I have given this talk in rooms where the projector wasn't that good as here. So here you can, unless you're colorblind, you can see the difference between these two colors. But I have given a talk where the projection wasn't that bad, and I couldn't explain this because there was no difference between those colors. And so, suppose that you're colorblind, you don't know which value is which. Also, you have things like risk MGT. What is risk MGT? If you have a machine read this out loud, well, the machine can read structured finance, but when a machine has to read risk MGT, it will say risk MGT. So you won't know what it's about. And then the other thing is, it's very difficult to know what is this value. Well, this value is, it's not 4, but is it 4.9? Is it 4.95? So you will add extra information to the PDF that makes the info color independent. So you have person, you have position, you have all the different assessment topics, and then you have the actual value. So the actual value is unambiguous. You don't have to guess where is this dot, what is the value. You resolve abbreviations. So MGT becomes management. So it's unambiguous what this abbreviation is about. And what goes into what column? Intentionally, I made a presentation that isn't that good, because that's not when you read this, you are never going to read it like this. You are going to read it like this. You are going to say, well, functional leadership, the person had a score of 2, he needed a score of 3. And this is a better way. So PDF UA, what is PDF UA about? PDF UA is about adding that kind of information to the PDF so that a machine can extract that information. That's one benefit. But when a machine can extract that information, the machine can also present it to someone who is blind or visually impaired. It can be read out in the correct way. And so someone who is blind can easily navigate. So suppose that this is a PDF with assistive technology. A blind person can say, go to column 2, row 5, or go to column 2, what is the header there? It's like accounting operations. And so navigation gets much more easy and when this information is available. Now, the concept, it's a technical specification for developers implementing PDF writing and processing software, and it provides terms and requirements to allow people with or without disabilities the same rights. This is a and if you have the appropriate software, you can consume the document. This is very important in the US, because in the US they have a Disabilities Act, and in the Disabilities Act you have Section 508, which says you cannot discriminate. When you put information online, everyone needs to have access to it, so you cannot have information online that is only available to people who can see. The information also needs to be available for people who are blind or visually impaired. In the start of 2016, there was the government didn't give any permission anymore to airlines who are not accessible. And it could be as simple as making an airport wheelchair accessible, but also the requirement was that all the boarding passes were accessible. And that's why all the airlines in the start of 2016 came to iText, because we could provide boarding passes that followed this specification. Then PADES, another standard. I'm going to give a session on digital signatures later on today. But what do we want to achieve with electronic signatures? Well, this is a Belgian guy, and it's an article from the newspaper, and he paid an invoice, but he built a new house, and he paid an invoice to his contractor, and the contractor never received the money. And so the contractor said, hey, you didn't pay $40,000, what happened? And he said, but I paid the invoice. And then they looked at the invoice, and they saw that the invoice was intercepted, and everything was the same except the wiring information. And so someone had intercepted the invoice, changed the wiring information, and the bank didn't want to give the guy his money back because the bank had made no error. He had given the wrong wiring information. So what do we want to achieve with digital signatures in PDF? Well, number one is integrity. We want to make sure if we send a document to someone that along the way the document didn't change. And so with digital signatures you can achieve this because when someone changes something on an invoice or on a document, the signature becomes invalid. Now this is a very old icon, and it's about a Pope, Sylvester, and an Emperor, Constantine, and it depicts the Emperor Constantine who gives the deed to the city of Rome to the Pope Sylvester. And this was used until the 11th century for the Pope to say, I'm the owner, the church is the owner of the city of Rome. But it turned out that the deed was forged. So this is supposed to have happened in the 4th century, but the document turned out to be of the 7th century. So it was a clear forge. Why do I show this? Well, we want to make sure that if someone receives a document, that this person can see, is it authentic? You have all these scams where people send you invoices, and the invoices look like a telco invoice. So you say, okay, I'm using this telco, so I'm going to pay the invoice. But you don't know if that invoice was originated from that telco company. Could be some scammer. So authenticity is the second thing we want to achieve. And then non-repudiation. Here you see Bart Simpson, and he has put his name in the concrete. But we all know Bart. He always says, I didn't do it. It wasn't me. Now, he cannot deny this in this case, because who's standing behind him? You see the shadow of Marge's hair, and someone is watching him and saying, hey, I testify that you did this. So non-repudiation is the third thing that we want to achieve with digital signatures. If someone signs a contract, we don't want that person to be able to say, I never signed this. I'm not going to pay this invoice because it's someone else's signature. So integrity, authenticity, non-repudiation, that's what we are going to try to achieve with digital signatures. And you can use this in a workflow. So later on today we will see a very simple example where different people sign a document, and then when it's, for instance here, you have read and approved by Bob, read and approved by Carol, and here you see that someone changed it. So Chuck changed one revision, and you see that the revision here, you see this became corrupt at this point. So someone, you know which revision was still valid and where the revision got corrupt. There's a chronology for the standards. You have the ISO standards that define how digital signatures are made, but you see the large gap between 2006 and 2017. Between those two dates, a lot of things happened. Like if we think about the hashing algorithm SHA-1, in 2011, NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology in the US, said SHA-1 theoretically is broken. You can have a document that is signed and then change the document without breaking the signature because of the fact that there's a flaw in SHA-1 theoretically. Earlier this year, Google proved that it is broken in practice. So Shattered was a project. If you go to shattered.io, you can read about the whole story. They had one PDF document, they changed it, and the signature didn't become invalid. And that's because processing power increases when and encryption algorithms, hashing algorithms, they are studied by people who, by academic people, and these people find flaws in these things. So this is living matter. And because of this large gap between the two, ETSI, another standards body, started making PADES, PDF Advanced Electronic Signatures, and they kind of updated the specification based on new insights. And in ISO 30-2002, published in 2017, parts of these standards were introduced in the core PDF standard. Now, I just mentioned PDF2. What happened in 2007 was that Adobe donated a proprietary standard to an international standards body. But there was a lot of terminology that was still Adobe related. Like in the specification, sometimes it mentioned Adobe Acrobat, like a product name. And in an international standard, you want the international standard to be vendor independent. So one of the things we did was remove all the instances of Adobe Acrobat, and we did the search and replace, and it just said PDF producing software. And sometimes the sentences were very awkward because of this automatic search and replace. So with PDF 2.0, ISO 30-2002, we did a detailed technical overview, and we fixed a number of things. So we updated all the references to other specifications. For instance, in the first ISO standard, it refers to Unicode 4.0. We upgraded this to 8.0. Then you saw that the number of pages decreased. Well, we tried to avoid duplication. XMP became a standard in 2012. So we now refer to the XMP ISO standard instead of adding a lot of information on XMP in the core PDF standard. And so there were also some links in the first version of the standard, some links like URLs that pointed nowhere anymore. So at the moment the standard was written, they were active, these links, but so we avoided links. And so yeah, we made everything non-proprietary. For instance, one of the things that was thrown away was reader enabling. Reader enabling was something that Adobe used its private key to sign a document, and then when you opened a document that was signed with Adobe's private key, Adobe Reader gave you a lot more functionality. For instance, when you fill out a form, a PDF form, you cannot save it locally. So Adobe wants you to buy Acrobat to do that, for instance. And by reader enabling, that was expensive, so you could reader enable a PDF, so you had to buy software from Adobe to do this. But with a reader enabled PDF, you could unlock the form saving functionality in the free Adobe Reader. And so this is something that is now completely gone. And then we fixed typos, errors, and inconsistencies. Now, some parts were substantially rewritten. For instance, I was responsible for the introduction of 12.8 about digital signatures, but we also noticed that the tagged PDF that I talked about in PDF UA, different vendors had a different interpretation of how the tagging was done. And this was because of the fact that the specification wasn't always that clear. So the chapters about tagged PDF and accessibility support were completely rewritten. So with PDF 2.0, there's a lot less ambiguity. And yeah, the PDF 2.0 is more demanding. Which ones are important? Well, for instance, I talked about the fact that encryption algorithms, they age. So encryption algorithms that were really state-of-the-art 10 years ago can now be broken. So, for instance, we now only allow 256-bit AES encryption, and no other encryption is allowed, like the alleged RC encryption, that's no longer allowed. We made some things required. So, what is an appearance stream? Well, if you have an annotation, the annotation you could kind of leave it to the viewer to render the annotation. Like I want to underline a word, that's an underline annotation. And so because you didn't define what that line should look like, different viewers gave a different presentation, and that's now forbidden in PDF 2.0. You have to really define the appearance. And like file IDs are no longer optional but required. That's something that I'll return to in a later session. And then some new features like geospatial. You can now add coordinates. If your PDF is a map, you can add a coordinate system so that you have, for instance, a longitude and a latitude. We added pronunciation hints so that when it's read out loud, that it's you have in English potato, potato, tomato, tomato, but now you can add exactly how it should be pronounced. Associated files, you had in the previous standard you had attachments, but the document didn't know anything about the relationship between the attachment and the document. Now with associated files you can say, well, this is extra documentation, or this is a source file, like this is the Word document that was used to create the PDF, or in the case of PADES, this is an alternative. Like if the IRS, the tax services receive an invoice, they can choose whether they read, whether a human reads the PDF or whether a machine reads the XML. Both are equivalent, so both have the same information. What is deprecated? Well, movie and sound annotations are replaced by rich media, so no more movie and sound. The old way of adding metadata is deprecated. It's replaced by XMP. SHA-1 for security, for evident reasons, and some security handlers. So I was in India a couple of months ago, and they had created a whole new system that still uses this security handler. And I said, you should change it because this is going to be deprecated in a couple of months, and so it's not really future-proof to still use that. And then the restrictions via DRM. When you secure a document, sometimes you make it more difficult for people to consume it, and so as it's an open standard, we want to avoid that. Now, what comes next? PDF exists since '93, and in '93, we couldn't imagine that we would read a PDF on, for instance, on our phone. And PDF was really originally digital paper. And so we didn't, well, it was unimaginable that you would read a PDF, for instance, on a smartwatch. The big screens, we didn't think of that. And so the problem with PDF is that when you read a PDF on your smartphone, you always have to, either the font is too small, or you have to kind of pinch and pan and scroll to be able to read the PDF. And that's where HTML5 is much better, because HTML5 can be made responsive and the content can adapt to the device. So yeah, and that doesn't exist in PDF. And so to make sure that PDF doesn't lose traction, doesn't lose like market size to HTML5, we think that PDF still has a lot of advantages, but we created a technical work group organized by the PDF Association, where different participants like Adobe, iText, Galas, Accessibility, Duolab, we work together, and we are creating a new next generation PDF format. What are the requirements? Well, we wanted to be fully compliant with PDF2. And we wanted to rely on properly tagged PDF. So PDF that has all the structure information, that knows what is the title, what are the paragraphs. If you have an image and a caption, well, this caption is the caption to that image. So all this information needs to be present. The qualities of PDF over HTML, we want to preserve this. The document needs to be reliable, portable, self-contained, secure. And we want, that's the new thing, we want the presentation to be able to adapt to the circumstances and to the device used to render the PDF. So we want to make sure that if we read it on a cell phone, if we read it on a big screen or on a desktop, that the presentation can adapt if the customer or if the user wants to. And we want to extend PDF into a variation of new and different workflows and use cases. So broaden the spectrum for PDF. Now, there are several concepts. We want to support the open web platform technology. And so what are we going to do? If a PDF is properly tagged, if we have all the information about the structure, it should be possible to derive HTML from the tagged PDF. And so what we're working on a set of rules. Given a PDF, you can always convert it to HTML5 with JavaScript, CSS, and so on. And so what is needed? Well, we need to define the logical reading order. How do people read this? Because like one thing that you have in non-tagged PDF, if you have a PDF with 2 columns and you ask a dumb system to read it out loud, it will read the first line of the first column, the first line of the second column, the second line of the, and so on. And so this is not going to work for someone who is blind. Someone who is blind wants to hear first the first column, then the second column. And so logical reading order is important. Semantic appropriateness, so that a title is recognized as a title, a paragraph is recognized as a part, and distinction from artifacts. What are artifacts? Well, you don't want a PDF to be read out loud where you have the headers with the page numbers. You want, like, if you have a paragraph that is distributed over 2 pages, you want the paragraph to be read out loud without having like a page number in between. So page numbers are artifacts. They don't need to be read out loud. Using namespaces and standard structure elements like tags, so creating rules that say, well, in HTML you have H1, H2, H3, H4. How do we put this information in a PDF? And then associations with embedded or external files for alternative representation. So for instance, I checked out of a hotel yesterday and I received a form where I had to say, how likely is it that you will recommend this hotel to someone else? Not likely at all, somewhat likely, neutral, very likely, and I totally will recommend this. Now, in PDF, you would have 5 checkboxes. That's the only way to have something like that, or I mean radio buttons, because you can only make one choice. Now, in HTML, you could have like a slider. So instead of ticking a radio button, you could kind of use a slider, and that's a nicer visual representation. So in next generation PDF, we will say, well, in PDF it's like this with the radio boxes. But we have an alternative. If you convert this to HTML, instead of having the radio buttons, use this slider. Use this component, this HTML component, as a slider. And so the advantages would be no more pinching and panning, so no more having trouble on your cell phone, easy derivation of PDF contents to HTML5, and so responsive PDF. Just like you have responsive HTML, by converting it to HTML5, the PDF will become responsive. While you will always be able to get the original PDF, so the reliable PDF. And then support for media queries. For instance, you can say, well, this PDF, I'm going to add 3 variations. One variation, if someone opens this PDF on a desktop, show this PDF. If someone opens it on a phone, show this one. If someone opens it on a tablet, show this PDF. So you can have one PDF with 3 different versions based on a media query. That's for screen, but also for print. Sometimes you say, well, I'm going to show the PDF on a screen. Everything is RGB, red, green, blue. But if you print it, use this variation of the PDF where everything is, all the colors are CMYK. That's another media query that you could pass. And different CSS files can be applied to the same content. So also for instance, if you have ebook readers, you can have day vision, like black letters on a white background. But you can also have night vision, where you say it's a black background with white letters. So that could be achieved with CSS on PDF. And search is improved, and yeah, it will be much more interactive. So next generation PDF is an attempt to use the best of both worlds, both PDF and HTML5. Now, another important thing in the working group for next generation PDF is that governments will support this format. And for instance, in the US, UA, Canada, and Australia, accessibility is really necessary. If you create a format that isn't accessible, it's never going to be used in the government. So there's currently, and see that there's a typo there, there's a lot of support for HTML in assistive technology, but not so much for PDF. We want to fix this with next generation PDF. And we want the specification to be technology neutral. That's why Adobe said, well, we don't want to develop this on our own, because then they will say, hey, Adobe, you're the monopolist. We are not going to use your document format. That's why we different companies work together. And users will have a choice. They will be able to consume as PDF. So like if it's a notarized document, people will use that notarized visualization of the PDF. But if they just want to read through it, they can consume it as HTML. And so there's no need for the government to give up on PDF, but for broad consumption, we make it just more accessible. So summarized, mobile-friendly representation of PDF documents, that's the goal. Improved navigation, improved search capabilities, smart interactive objects, and make sure that we leverage embedded files. The implementation, so this is all very theoretic, I know. There is no finalized specification yet. It's in the works. And we are not going to create a specification and then wait for the implementation. In the working group, well, we say we want to have at least 3 vendors with a commercial implementation and before the spec is released. And ITEX wants to be one of these vendors. So what are we doing now? Well, we're working together with Adobe to create well-tagged PDFs for testing purposes. So Adobe is now a contributor to iText for the new tagging, so for PDF 2.0 tagging. We work with Adobe to make sure that we all interpret the tagging rules the same way. And so already we found some ambiguities that we are fixing. DualLab is a partner who uses iText to, if you have a PDF, a tagged PDF, to convert it to HTML. And later on I'll have a session about how we are working on better HTML to PDF conversion. So this is the first part, the theoretical part about standards. And I'm going to give the floor to Johannes, I think, or to Sujira to talk more about the concrete implementation.